So thanks everyone for joining our special side event here today. My name is Sarah Ghorpade. I'm here with my co-presenters, Lowine Hill and Madu Galappaththi. And we've been leading an initiative on campus over the past year or so on decolonizing research methodologies for sustainability. So today we're going to talk about some learnings from that initiative. And as you can tell from the title, we hope that you'll get involved as well. So you'll hear about your part in a bit. So just to introduce the session, we'll be sharing a step-by-step process that we developed through our initiative to guide reflections towards the conduct of decolonized research. And we'll discuss the lessons learned from our initiative so far. And that part of the session will be followed by an interactive brainstorming session with the audience. So we really welcome your participation, and we hope to explore with you the relevance and applicability of the concept of decolonization within the focus areas of the SDSN and potentially more broadly the SDGs. And we'd love to hear your ideas for potential programs and activities that could be offered through the network in the future. So we really do love to have you participate. Throughout our initiative, we've really tried to engage with the audience. We think it's really important to learn from each other. And we always invite your questions, so please do put them in the chat or raise your digital hand. And we try to make sure as well that we create an open and safe space for discussion. Some of the topics around decolonization can be uncomfortable, a bit sensitive. They're often new terrain for people. So we want to make sure that everyone feels safe to share and that the dialogue is always respectful. And everyone, is welcome to share, but not obliged to do so. So first, I think we could, if you all have devices in front of you, we'd just like to know generally who you are in the audience. So if you could go to menti.com and enter the code you see there, and just indicate your broad category, the ones listed there, whether you're student, faculty, staff, from a partner organization, or something else.
So we actually have one person each, a faculty, a member grad student, university admin, nonprofit partner, and we have one public sector partner, community organizer. And
so perfect.
Okay. We now have
perfect
students.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So just a brief overview of our presentation. We'll first share with you a little bit about our initiative. Then we'll talk a bit about what we mean by decolonized research and why we think it's important. So we know, decolonization in general can be a big term. There's a lot of different interpretations. So we'll tell you a bit about how we interpret it specifically with respect to research. We'll talk a little about the SDGs and the decolonized research agenda. And then we'll share with you our step-by-step guide that we've used to guide critical reflections towards decolonized research. And then finally, the interactive brainstorming portion of the session. Okay, so we'd like your participation again. If you could head to Menti again, we can post the new code. And here we want to know, what does decolonizing research mean to you? So don't overthink it, just whatever comes to the top of your head. You can put in more than one term, but just like to get a sense of how you think about this or how you currently interpret this term, decolonizing research. Okay, so as I said, our initiative started about a year ago. We held a 3-part workshop series for graduate students in the winter 2021 term. And we had been talking with our research group about questions of doing research in other cultural contexts was kind of the starting point. And as we kind of talked more and reflected more and read on it, we realized that there was a gap in sort of guidance on how to actually go about decolonizing the research process. So there wasn't a lot of guidance from within our programs or even in the literature, and many of us had never even kind of had such discussions in an academic setting before. So we thought the workshop series as a way to sort of fill that gap. So we targeted graduate students, and we had a mix of different activities in the workshop series. It was a 3-part series, so once a week for 3 weeks. And we had some interactive exercises. We had guest speakers and panelists from across the Waterloo campus. We had breakout rooms that facilitated collective reflection and mutual learning. And we supported our participants to work through the framework, the 3-step guide that we had developed towards the decolonization process. So that was kind of the first part of our experiment, to get a group together and see what we could learn through that. The second part was a really interesting speakers series held between last fall term and up until our last session just last week. And this was a great series, and we were able to get some more international speakers. So we were able to get a bit of a more international perspective on decolonizing research, which was really interesting. And as well, we were really fortunate to have people who have been doing this work in the field. So we, heard from researchers who have been on the ground, actually trying to put into action a lot of these things that we had talked about over years of experience. So it was a lot of really enlightening discussions and great audience engagement as well. And the third part is an e-course on decolonizing research methodologies, which actually just launched yesterday. So that's as well for graduate students. And again, it's focused on supporting graduate students to implement actions towards decolonizing their own research, regardless of the research stage. So again, filling that gap that we noted prior to the workshop series in a little bit more of an in-depth and a more formalized way. So what do we mean by decolonizing research? So the process of decolonizing research involves challenging the status quo of how we do research, recognizing in an explicit way how power, privilege, passion, and position on our part as researchers influence the research process. And it requires us to develop a critical reflection and respectful research practice. And all of this is particularly important in the field that we work in, and the field that we're all here to talk about today is sustainability, given the central importance of social justice in progress on sustainability and societal change. So why is decolonized research needed? So current research practice evolved out of ideologies of colonialism, post-colonialism, and imperialism. And the ideas of those ideologies that cast certain people in positions of privilege and power, and really valued their expertise above others, led to some harmful research practice, and basically justified research practice that could be harmful and exploitative, and even ranging from really violent practice, blatant human rights abuses, and so on. And these colonial tendencies, though in less overt ways, continue in current research practice. And this is reflected in language we have use of, for example, research subjects, going to the field. We hear often people refer to communities as laboratories. So this implies this relationship of us going in to study something, and taking what we want as researchers and leaving. And we don't often question these methodologies or the purpose of the researcher who we're accountable to in the process. Nor do we question the relationship that we have with the researcher and research, though it's embedded in this traditional kind of power hierarchy where we as researchers implicitly have power over the researched due to our status as experts. And we need a paradigm shift wherein the researcher and the researched are seen as co-researchers rather than the academic expert and the research subject. And this is partly because community members themselves have all kinds of expertise, including through indigenous or traditional knowledge, as well as through the lived experiences they have from that place. So those forms of expertise need to be given value and legitimacy as well. And again, this is really critical in sustainability, given that we're seeking to work towards social justice. So our research itself must ensure that we're aware of these things.
So I will speak a little bit more toward the relationship of the Decolonizing Research agenda and the SDGs. So we cannot really go into that questioning without really looking into what the SDGs stand for and a bit of the historical background that kind of created the SDGs. So there's a bit of a blurry relationship because, you know, without like behind the SDGs, we have organizations, you know, like the UN, that the World Bank or the IMF, where you know, those organizations do not have a necessarily good track record into supporting the emancipation of previously colonized people. So, you know, there is, when the SDGs were drafted, there was a really extensive deliberation process that really made sure to include a multiplicity of voices. However, still, the material upon which the SDGs have been drafted is very much northern, you know, anthropocentric and northern, and based on northern form of knowledge. And so, because also some of the donor-driven and like project-driven ways toward which the SDGs are implemented in practice, we kind of have to question ourselves, okay, so how are the SDGs really compatible with decolonization? However, you know, if we reflect on the very nature or on the end of the SDGs and the focus on transformation, we can see a way where our decolonizing research agenda and putting people that were formerly not given a voice at the center of our research process can help moving toward achieving some of the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly if we can emphasize the focus on transformation. So recognizing that not only, yes, some of the sustainability issues that we are facing right now are emerging from the colonial system of colonial systems, and notably in terms of hierarchies of people, in terms of knowledge systems. But then we can see that there is a will to focus, to integrate really multiple ways of doing, multiple ways of seeing, and multiple ways of knowing the world. And, you know, this integration of this multiple source of knowledge is really a way that we can achieve some of the goals that the SDGs have, well, some of the goals of the SDGs, right? And then this is where really we want to focus our work. So really like trying to find the synergies between the very nature of the goal, which is, you know, putting those people, the voices of people traditionally marginalized at the center of the agenda of the research process, so that we can really achieve the SDGs. And so this is why we have created, you know, this three-part process. And I will give back the mic to the virtual mic to Sarah.
So we'll walk you through the three-step process that we developed to guide reflection towards decolonizing research. And the first step is to identify sources of power and privilege on our own part as researchers. So really this entire process has to start with ourselves. we need to reflect on our own identities first before we move on to the research itself. So this helped us unpack our identity in relation to various social characteristics like gender, ethnicity, race, class, migration status, and also helped us to recognize differences and similarities that we view between ourselves and others, and how these identities may influence our research process. And reflect on the notions of power and positionality and how these will also inevitably influence the research process. So all of these things are going to influence, for example, how we decide on research questions, how we collect data, the kind of problems that we think are important to address, and the kind of solutions that we seek to achieve, how we decide to present our findings. So really every stage of the research process is impacted by how we view ourselves and how we view others. So we used a particular tool. This is a really great tool. It's available online if you're interested. It's called the Social Identity Wheel. And we use this tool to guide the reflection on our identities. So as we know, we all have multiple identities, and these overlap in shaping our individual unique identity as a researcher. And this is in relation to both how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us, which occurs in the context of our research as well. So it can often be difficult to know where to start. So this was a really great tool that, again, started the process directly on ourselves and got us thinking about aspects of our identity that we may not have, some that we do have. And there's some really great guiding questions in the middle to sort of help you through the process. So step 2 is really identifying the aspects of our research that require decolonizing. And this requires us to think about our epistemology, so the ways of knowing, doing, and understanding that we hold. And there may be certain biases, assumptions, and romanticized ways of understanding that can come from ourselves. They can come from our upbringing, come from cultural ideas, and they can also come from the literature and other sources that we draw on. As we know, knowledge is not neutral. So all of these things combine to impact, again, how we approach the research and how we interpret the knowledge that we absorb. This also involves critically examining what aspects of our own research can be problematic with respect to power. So what are the colonized aspects of our research that may structurally reproduce colonial hierarchies and status quos? So in particular, as researchers being trained in a Western institution, that automatically brings with it an implicit level of power in any kind of research interaction. So overall, this involves identifying the elements of our research process that need to be unlearned, changed, or challenged. And the final step is to really bring other voices and epistemologies into the center of the research process. So how we take these reflections and learnings and then go about embarking on a decolonized research praxis. So this could involve broadening disciplinary boundaries, so relying on interdisciplinarity, incorporating non-disciplinary perspectives in the relearning process. So really going beyond the familiar academic boundaries that we've grown accustomed to. And this includes developing an in-depth understanding of the local histories, traditions, knowledge systems, and cultures in the place where the research is conducted. And this is really important not only to enhance the quality of our research by acknowledging and valuing local sources of knowledge, but to avoid missteps, to ensure that we're being respectful of the communities that we're working in, and to help ensure that we're accounting for important contextual factors that will influence our research. And this also enhances the level of engagement as well. And finally, it's important to move away from these kind of power dynamics or positions that traditionally have been played by researcher and research subjects, and rather view community members as co-researchers, questioners, critics, theorists, knowers, communicators, and collaborators, because indeed their input is critical to the research process. So to acknowledge that as such and treat their position with the respect that it deserves. And this hopefully will help us to consider as well their perspectives with equal footing as the ones that we bring. So this is the 3-step process that we've taken guidance from and that we've used with our graduate student participants to help work through the decolonization process. And now we'd love to hear some input from your side on how you see decolonization fitting within progress toward the SDGs, whether there are challenges and opportunities that you could identify. Do any of the themes or topics that we've highlighted today resonate with you? Are there any others that you've thought about or grapple with? And then if you have any specific or concrete ideas of how decolonization programs or other activities could be implemented within the SDSN, we'd love to hear that as well.
Okay, so we have our first question. As there are targets and indicators, how can this approach be used to perhaps recraft this to include a decolonized lens?
That's an excellent question, really good question. I like the question because it's very practical, right? So the SDGs are the set of goals, and it's great to have goals, and they are great goals. But then when you start breaking down, the steps to reach those goals, it gets sometimes complicated. And I think that would be a great idea to, assess the targets as they are through a decolonized lens and adjust accordingly. One thing that just comes to mind off the top of the head, and then Lowine, if you have anything else to share, I think it really needs to be context specific. So this is something that keeps coming up in all our discussions, and every speaker we've had is like, you really have to be aware of context, and context is so critical. So I think that is definitely possible, but I think it would really need to be on a context specific basis. So I don't see across the board how a target that does that, other than saying, okay, then go take this to your context and assess it through a kind of decolonization lens with appropriate stakeholders, something like that.
Yeah, so exactly. Like this is basically what I was going to emphasize as well. Is like a lot of the issues that that emerge when we talk about the SDGs and just in general, I guess if we go wider into development, it's a bit this like kind of globalized perspective where we can have a kind of one size fit all solution to all problems that will be applicable everywhere, which is not the case. And so if we can recontextualize even the goal themselves, then we can that would be a good way to even start the process and see, who is involved into that whole process and why they are involved there. So also going into that questioning would be a really good start into include that decolonized lens. But then, I mean, even if we go, I think I will stop there. I think I will stop at that because we can really go into if we take a bit of a wider stance, then we can really go far away. But yeah, I will stop there. So there's another question. So I really like how you've shown the integration, interconnectedness, oh boy, of the goals, helping to align with a more decolonized field. I think the challenge remains around the concept of power and respect and relationship. I'm not sure the equity SDG covers that sufficiently. in many indigenous ways of knowing, relationship is the foundation of everything. True. And, not, like even in not necessarily indigenous, but also if you want to go into localized, like community ways, like, yes, relationship is really the foundation of everything. And that's what, when we're saying earlier, that kind of blurry relationship with the SDGs, it's still really mainly based out of northern ways of thinking and ways of knowing, even if they did go around and did that really widespread consultation. And so this is why well, yes, they are like the SDGs are really far reaching, but they still, I think personally, and Sarah and Madu, you can sort of thing, but I think they still kind of fall short into really achieving like what they aim to do. And so using a bit of a decolonization and breaking out of like the system within which the SDGs were actually created, then maybe we can actually reach those goals, but it's not straightforward. So yeah.
Yeah, and just a quick other thought, partnership is one individual goal, right? I mean, really that's one that, I mean, they're all interconnected, of course, but so it's there in a way, but in a more foundational and systematic way would be important to see. That's a great point about relationality.
Okay, so we have another question. What is your experience in changing the relationship between researcher and research into co-researcher? Any good practice and learning or challenges considering the power dynamic? So funding, donor, who set the limits, who have more power, etc. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys want to speak to that?
Oh. Yeah, I would just say that, sorry, you want to go ahead, Madu?
No, Sarah, I'll go after you. Please go ahead.
I've talked a lot. I'll say that I didn't know until we started on this journey ourselves just how much literature is out there. And, though there's still the kind of entrenched ways of doing research, there's a lot of people doing things differently. And I'm sure that doesn't always come through in the publications as well. But there's like interesting books on it. And we've actually come across different frameworks and then I mentioned our speakers that we've had, and they've all had like interesting, unique ideas on how to go about it. So it's still kind of a constant effort. It's not the natural way, and so there are certainly challenges, but there are ways and a lot of inspiring stories and guidance out there in the literature once you start looking.
Yeah, so to quickly add to that, in our experience, in our own research, in our own engagement with the communities, what we are realizing is that there's no set recipe. So it's really how we want to approach it. And in our case, through the three-step process, the approach we are taking to understand who we are, our position as researchers, and who the research is helping us. So in doing that, in trying to identify the similarities or the differences in how we view each other, what we are trying to get at is sort of the power gaps and power differences and how that manifests in the process, and who has the power and what are those sources of power and how we can challenge that and address that. And in doing so, the approach we are taking is, we call it the respectful way of engagement, with a goal to bring down those barriers, the power barriers. And in doing so, trust building, engagement, early engagement, and keeping in close contact with the partners in the field are some of the things that we do. But really it depends on the communities that we are working with.
And if I can also add to that, I think one way, and that's basically what I also use when I do research and when I talk to people in general, it's really to learn how to decenter yourself and decenter your me and your, who you are as a person. And maybe I'm going to be rude in saying that, and shutting up and listening. I think this is really one way. I mean, I don't want to be crude, but this is really, one way that we can learn what people are saying, what is the problem, because oftentimes we have the problem, we have the research problem because we went through the literature, and then we're like, oh, this is a gap, and then we're going, and then we just like, okay, this is what we're trying to solve. When sometimes in reality, this is not necessarily the problem of the people that are in front of us. Sometimes the problem is totally somewhere else, or sometimes aspect of what you thought the solution was, for example, is not necessarily applicable to that specific context. So really, I think in practice is really kind of finding ways to decenter your experience and really taking that step back and just kind of thinking into there's a second part of the, before that, the second part of the question, but even before that, in terms of funding and all that. So true, we are working in a project-based system. So, whether it is your own research, this is we're doing a PhD. So this is like a set of 4 years, and then after that we have to move on. If there's a project, it might be like 5 years, and you have to move on, or 2 years and you have to move on. So those are really difficult to work with, especially because a lot of relationship building and trust building is really central to the whole process. So it can be difficult within those time limits to actually build something, with the communities. However, if from the get-go, you go in with that kind of mindset and that, even within that little short time that you have, then there's a way to actually do something meaningful. And I know for the paradigm shift, yes, I think it has, and I don't want to take too much of the space, but we see it. We see that people, the simple fact that we are having that conversation right now, that we see that there is a change occurring. It's not a quick change, because that requires a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-questioning, and a lot of self-judging as well. That is not often people are comfortable with that, but just the fact that we're having that conversation and we are having those questioning. So I think that itself is a good, it's a good way to start. So yeah, I don't know.
So to quickly add to that, so true. And the fact that we are talking, approaching it from the viewpoint of a paradigm shift itself is a shift, right? We are recognizing that a shift is needed. And in working towards decolonization, something that we are increasingly understanding is we can't decolonize without challenging the structures, without questioning, like you said, without that self-reflection. So that is where the paradigm shift or the transformative practices coming in. And we need to be very cognizant about like Lowine mentioned, the practical challenges, the funding, the timeline, etc. challenges, which are real issues in moving work forward. But what we do see and have learned through our initiative is there are things that definitely can be done outside of those challenges. For example, thinking about positionality and trying to understand more about the histories of the context that we are working in and trying to build that relationship can happen without, I'm not going to say without, but a lot can be done in that space in particular, which will eventually lead to changing mindset. So it's more about how we approach our work and the sort of the long-term commitment that we make in doing so. And then for us grad students, it's a learning experience. So we do in our own research in that learning and training context, and trying to pick and choose some ideas that seem more applicable, more practical, and then trying it and then learning from it. So throughout our initiative, we say that we want to do action planning and real in our practice. But ultimately, it's more about how, as researchers, who we want to be in future, and sort of the mindset and the practice that we want to continue with. Okay, I'll stop there. So I see we get lots of interesting questions.
Yes, but the thing is, we only have like 2 minutes more. So I will put our email address in the chat, so that, you know, if you want to contact us and actually continue the conversation and like answer some of those questions were still there, and so we can do that. Yes, let me just put that. So I put in the chat, sent to everyone, so our contact information. It's just such a short time for such a big topic. So just, yeah.
Thank you all for the great questions, and we're happy to follow up because there are really lots to talk about there.
Yes, thank you. And yes, just contact us, and we can continue the conversation outside.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today, and thanks for your engagement. And someone's sharing, yes, those are great resources, Robbie, thank you. We've come across those in our own research. So Robbie's suggesting a couple, and those are great if anyone wants to look into those. And yeah, if you have resources to share further, please do. And if you want to ask us for resources, we're happy to share as well. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.